Do you ever feel lonely? Do you ever feel sad? Well, you might be a good candidate for an MMO. Or at least, that's what I told myself. And so I hopped in. I began my adventure into the great beyond, the massive, the multiplayer, the online experience. Now, if you take a look at my MMO resume, you'll see it all starts out with World of Warcraft. I was playing with my cousin, we were having fun, and I've also, shortly after that, Final Fantasy XIV, you'll also see on that resume. And we were having a blast. And it was primarily with him, and it felt cool, everything felt great. But there were times when he couldn't always be there, so when he wasn't around, I started to play with myself. Well, I should say I started to play solo. So I started to play solo, and I'd walk around, and that's when I started to notice this feeling. I remember walking around the Barrens, and the name aside, the name Barrens implies, obviously, it's barren, there's not much going on, but that's not actually how it was in the olden days of vanilla WoW, or even classic WoW. The Barrens chat is still legendary and talked about to this day. So I knew the history, I knew the lore of these hallowed grounds, but in terms of the Barrens these days, and when I would venture off without my cousin while he was resting, I found that it was barren. It was empty. And I just found myself feeling this strange feeling I never thought I would experience while playing an MMO. So yeah, as I walked around, the chat empty, this legendary chat, just wondering who was out there and what they were doing without me, I began to look away from the screen and wondered the same thing about this life I'm living right now. And then I began to snap out of it and told myself, wait, that's not what a game's supposed to do. I thought people played these games to talk, to know other gamers. So why do I feel more lonely than ever? All of a sudden, everything started to feel much less massive, much less multiplayer, and just a little online. I began to think back into my gaming history. I went through the archives. I remembered playing Skyrim, The Witcher 3, Medieval. All of these games that have me feeling more welcome and less lonely than MMOs. It's as if before I played the MMO, I didn't feel lonely at all. And it was such a strange thing to realize, because you'd think single player game, what gets more lonely than that? Single player is in the title of the description of the game. But I still hadn't quite felt this sense that I was feeling right now in a single player game. So naturally, I began to wonder, why is this? Why am I feeling lonely in this MMO? And, there's the clear answer, well, because you're not seeing anyone at this moment. And that is certainly part of it. But there's something else there. Specifically, I keep going back to those moments in the Barrens when I was walking around farming and having that sensation just sort of looming over me. And I began to wonder why. And part of it is, with that particular game, World of Warcraft, I knew about the generations of players before me. I knew about the early days, and I knew what classic WoW was like when it first launched, and it's as if I could see those footsteps in the dusty grounds of the Barrens, but I knew that most of those footsteps were from people who were no longer in Azeroth. They were no longer in the game. And something about that felt lonely. It's knowledge that the game doesn't necessarily provide to me, but it's something that I just inherently know and I can sense around me. The emptiness of that chat, or getting a chat and then you realizing, holy cow, that's the first social interaction I've had while playing this game. Yet, this is supposed to be an MMO, so how is that working out? There are moments, of course, when you're farming in the Barrens or you go through a dungeon and you hang out with a group, you work together to complete that dungeon. But almost always, you'll go your separate ways. Maybe you'll jump at each other in greeting. It's always so exciting to see someone else, but again, a lot of times in these games, it's a reminder of the fact that you hadn't seen someone for a long time prior to that. And there's just something interesting about that. But like I said, there are those moments when you do see people and you have these times with them that are so fun, but they don't last. And, nothing lasts, of course. Everything's temporary. But those particular moments are even in themselves lonely. Maybe this is just how my mind works. I wouldn't call myself a negative person, but even those people you chat with or wave to, it's temporary. And even those that I've friended might get on a few times, but we never become close enough to figure out each other's schedules and work out a time where we can just make it work. Everyone's busy and it doesn't last. And then eventually you'll log on one day and then they're just a grayed out name. You haven't logged on in forever. And you remember the time you had, and it's cool that this game gave you that. But that just adds to that sense even more. I love the idea of MMOs, to be clear. I think that they're very cool, and I have had a lot of cool experiences playing them. But my funnest times have certainly been when I'm playing them with someone else. It's not necessarily me as an individual in this massive online world becoming part of a community. Rather, it's been the times when I'm with someone else and I'm experiencing this world with them, and it's cool seeing people around us and we can talk about it, but not myself as a solo player. And I wouldn't say that I'm particularly antisocial when I'm playing. I'll chat someone up, I'll try to hang out with them, I'll wave at them and fight with them and help them out and stuff, because it is fun. And I'm always willing to do that because it's cool. That's why I play the games. But in the end, no one's fault. Everyone just has their own agendas. But that does sort of leave me this Tauren warrior hanging out in the Barrens looking around like, it's as if I can hear the wind and I see a tumbleweed just going across the screen, and it's like, well, I guess I'm here in this world, chilling. MMOs are very good at creating instant nostalgia, and that's something World of Warcraft excels at. And it's why people love to create those new characters. Start over from level 5. There's so many reasons to it, but I think the biggest thing for me is when I'm playing a game that has enough of a population to it, and by that I mean enough of a player base, and I'm starting out and we're all learning together, that right there is immediate nostalgia. The second you spawn in and see all these characters jumping around, being goofy, trying to figure out their movesets, trying to learn the world, just trying to break the game or whatever they're doing, realizing they can just go anywhere they want now. It truly is a world, and it feels like that when you just start out. And that's what happens with a game that has enough of a player base like that. But the point is, when you start out with those characters, the reason why people love to replay, start a new character and start a new class, whatever you want to do, is because that sensation of loneliness hasn't set in. And it's not there when you're in the starting area. You're a bunch of young pups. To me it sort of feels like something like Naruto, if you've ever seen it. It's like the sort of time before the Chunin exams, when everyone's still in the Hidden Leaf Village. There's something cozy about that time. Nothing bad has happened yet. You haven't gone your separate ways. You're still together. You're going through ordeals together. You're young pups learning the ways of the world. And you're most of the time adventuring together too, because at that level everyone's so tunneled into the same area, the same missions and everything, that you just get to know someone sort of, and maybe there's someone teaching you the ropes, or even if it's not your first time playing, you're still seeing new players, getting you excited. It's cool to see how excited they are to play the game, how many questions they have, and so forth. So I just feel like that at least is curbed a bit by games that have that initial starting area. But unless you have your perfect group, your perfect raid group that you've known for years, and you have all that figured out, all of that really does start to dissipate after you leave your community and start to walk out there, and it feels lonely. Now, there is something to that lonely feeling where it ends up making those social interactions so nice and fleeting. You know, one thing that really makes it easy to appreciate those moments with people and makes you want to pay full attention and be focused on them is the fact that you don't have a lot of those. You know, so when you actually do have those moments with people, you are so excited. When I'm walking around the Barrens and I see a name pop up across the horizon, I'm like, holy cow, that's so cool. I've got to go find who that is, chat them up, see how they're doing. And that is a benefit, I suppose, but there are certainly negatives to the population being totally overinflated and people being everywhere, not enough resources everywhere, everyone's farming all the time. There are certainly problems to that. But there's just something about when you walk into a town and there's a ton of people. You can't see anything besides all the bodies. Your screen's lagging out, and there's something really special about that. It's the reason why people migrate servers and why there are so many dead servers, and that's such a hard phenomenon to figure out. Because they want to be part of a community. It's why most of the servers are either all Horde or all Alliance. It's because part of the reason is because it's just kind of hard and annoying, especially if you're on a PvP server, to be playing in a server where your faction's 3%. But part of it is also, you want to be part of that community. You want to be the majority, because that means you have that community. You're not going to be lonely. You don't want to be the one Alliance member walking around, not just because it's hard, but because you have no one to talk to, you know? So, I don't know. It's just, it's something that I see in every game I play, and it's really hard for the smaller games to gain any traction. And the reason why people play MMOs are for those experiences, you know? So, I love the idea. This isn't me hating on them. It's just this phenomenon that I experience that eventually turns me off. And I don't envy any MMO that has to try to gain enough of a player base to do that. So I hopped on a few games. I hopped on a few MMOs before that I'd played a little of, or maybe not at all, or just created a character. And I entered the worlds again. And once again, like I was saying, they felt lived in. I even had a character in DC Universe Online from years ago that I rebooted up. My little cat guy with spiky armor. It was a fun game, I remember, when I played, and it's cool to be in the DC Universe, but it looked weird to me too when I first started out. I started punching this guy and just kept punching him and punching him and punching him and punching him. And then he was punching me back and forth, hitting me with random attacks, and there wasn't any UI on the screen, and it didn't seem like either of us were doing damage to each other. Then finally his homies showed up and they knocked me out. And then upon dying, all of the UI and everything came back. So I think it was just glitched when I entered. Probably because they couldn't believe that I was logging on after 8 years or whatever it had been. But then this guy tried to run me over, but at least he stopped at the sidewalk, so that was nice. But it was just empty feeling as I was playing, and there were people chatting, which was cool. You know, that happens in MMOs, but I don't know. I love DC. I'm happy that this exists. I'm happy that these MMOs exist. Character models are a little silly, but what I wouldn't do for a DC Rivals, by the way, or whatever you'd call it, like Marvel Rivals, but with DC characters. I don't know. It's just, it still had that lonely feeling, and of course, I'm going in with the intention and the knowledge that, yes, I'm making this video. So of course that's in the back of my head. I'm not going in with a totally clear mind, but it's the previous experiences and this one that informed that. So, you know, it was very soon after I started playing again, after I created a new character, that I immediately felt that loneliness. And especially with some of the older ones that I played, there weren't even many characters in the starting area like you might find in WoW or something like that. One thing I noticed when playing the games is that feeling of starting over is so special because it's giving us an opportunity to become part of a group, to enter a faction, to become a class that the others are part of. In theory, you become part of that group. You're a family with the Horde or the Alliance or the particular faction you're choosing in the game, etc. But when you enter the world, expecting to see the army behind that faction, it isn't there. And to be clear, this isn't the fault of the game sometimes, it's just that attention spans are so spread thin now, and there are so many MMOs that it's hard to find an actual MMO that captures enough of a player base to create that feeling you're hoping to experience when you play an MMO. Because that's the real problem with them. They rely on having the dominant player base, whereas you have single player games or even multiplayer games that at least still have, you know, sort of a niche. They can still exist without requiring the term massive in them. There are still games that you can go back to and play multiplayer matches on, like the old Battlefields or whatever. You can still find a server where there's dedicated people, and maybe there's just a few hundred, but you don't need that to feel lived in. In an MMO, you need that dominant player base to make it what you're hoping for, and to make it what makes it really fun and exciting. And that's what makes something like WoW or Final Fantasy so enticing to this day. It has the one thing most other MMOs don't, and that's because they were so early on and they did things so right at the beginning. It has a large player base. And that in itself, putting gameplay aside, that as well as the history behind it, is enough of a reason to play, and that's really all it takes. That's why MMOs are so interesting. The reason why WoW was the first MMO I played was because it was the one everyone talked about, and I wanted to be part of that virtual online world. And even to this day, when you play WoW, when you play Final Fantasy XIV, you do feel that sense of community. The only difference with those games is it fades after you leave the starting zone or around level 10 or so. Then you start to feel that loneliness set in again. And that's when it hits me, and that's when I want to start a new character, and it's that whole MMO new character phenomenon begins again. So yeah, I tried a whole bunch of MMOs. I didn't get too far into them. I just wanted to see how populated they were at the beginning, and so I just booted up a bunch. I didn't decide to pay for any subscription-based ones, because I'd put my time in with WoW at the very least, and I did have New World on my PC, and I had fun with New World, but again, that was just pretty empty, but what a cool concept. You know, I like the idea of that game. And random aside here, but that Buster Sword in Throne and Liberty cracked me up. It's literally the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy, and it's your starting weapon. So that was another game that was interesting and cool and feels kind of good to play. The frame rates are so inconsistent whenever I play, but it felt like that had potential too. But again, it's sort of the amazing thing about what Marvel Rivals just did. The question for these MMOs is, how do you take that player base away from the WoW the Final Fantasy XIV to your game, because that's what you need as an MMO, like I was saying, to exist. And it's going to take something truly special. And even with all of the mistakes Blizzard has made, with how bad Final Fantasy XIV was to start, they still managed to capture enough of the player base. And it seems like even with those mistakes, they're still so ingrained because of the past that they have, the acumen they've built up, the player base. People don't want to leave because it's the one place where they can guarantee community and history. And on top of all that, us as gamers, as we know, one of the biggest things we have a blind spot for, or we willingly see and buy into, I love this particular concept, is nostalgia. And WoW is the ultimate nostalgia game, you know? So that's a big part of the MMO phenomenon, and why it's hard for a new one to exist, and why loneliness does exist in these games. The more that come out, the more it's spread, and the more that multiplayer experience becomes less prominent. Those capital M's, they become little baby lowercase m's.